Mountains carved into with secret tunnels, entire islands where the wildlife can kill you in minutes, and labs so contaminated that one wrong step can spell utter disaster. These are restricted zones scientists believe are hiding something dangerous. Mount Yamantau is a massive mountain in the southern Urals, and for decades Russia and the US have gone back and forth over what's actually inside it. The place is surrounded by Mezhgorye, a closed-off city. You can't just wander in and visit, at least without very specific permission. The area is heavily patrolled. They do not want people poking around here. Back in the 90s, American satellite images showed huge construction around the mountain. Tunnels, buildings disappearing into the hillside, whole sections dug out. When the US asked what they were building, the Russian government gave a bunch of different answers. Food storage, a mining site, important artifacts are kept here. The explanations kept changing, which naturally made them even more suspicious. US intelligence agencies have suggested the site might be a nuclear bunker, big enough to house tens of thousands of people, stacked with years' worth of supplies, but no one outside of the Russian government actually knows what's inside the mountain. All we know for sure is that the area is sealed off. Maybe they're hiding the entrance to the Upside Down. I had to do it. Season 5 is out. Pine Gap is a giant intelligence facility in the middle of Australia, run jointly by the US and Australia. You'll see massive radar domes sitting out in the desert, and that's about the only part they let you see. Everything else is blocked by fencing, patrols, a level of secrecy that honestly kind of rivals places like Area 51, which I promise will not be on this list. The facility tracks satellites, monitors signals, and handles intelligence data that nobody outside those agencies gets to see. Even the airspace above it is restricted, and if anyone tries to get close on foot, they're stopped immediately. There have been protests over the years by people who want more transparency, but the government never really shares details. They just repeat that it's a defense site, it's classified, and it just is what it is. Because it's out in the middle of nowhere, Pine Gap has this strange vibe where the openness of the landscape makes the facility feel even more isolated. There's nothing around it except desert. Makes you wonder what kind of testing could be going on. One of the main theories, though, is that this is one big surveillance operation. All we can really say for sure, though, is that whatever Pine Gap collects or processes, it's important enough that 2 entire governments keep it locked away. In the Utah desert, you'll find Dugway Proving Ground. The US Army has used it for chemical and biological testing since the 40s. Unsurprisingly, the whole area is restricted, not just because they still run incredibly dangerous tests, but because there's still leftover contamination from all the older experiments. Not to worry, though, you cannot just wander into Dugway accidentally. The perimeter is massive, it's constantly patrolled, and it's full of warning signs that make it very clear where you are. 2015 Dugway Proving Ground was in the news for a pretty disturbing reason. The facility accidentally shipped live anthrax samples to other labs. Not sure how that happens, but does go to show just how serious the work there is. Dugway has stretches of land big enough that they can fire off weapons, test drones, and run vehicle experiments without anyone seeing from nearby towns. There's barely any public reporting on what goes on day to day. And even most military personnel don't have access to certain sections. Whether you look at the contamination from all the tests they've already done decades back or the kind of work they still do, the place is clearly restricted for a very good reason. I don't think anyone would ever gather online and decide to storm Dugway Proving Ground like they would with Area 51. And the Russian equivalent of Dugway would probably be Kapustin Yar. This place has been running since 1946. Started out as one of the Soviet Union's biggest rocket and weapons testing sites. It's out in the Astrakhan region in an area so remote and flat that you can see for miles. Perfect for firing off missiles and other stuff they just really don't want near civilians. And because of that, the entire area is off limits. You don't drive past it, you don't fly over it, unless you're approved. They've done a lot here over the years. They tested ballistic missiles, high-altitude research vehicles, and all kinds of experimental, classified military technology. And for a long time, the place didn't even show up on normal maps. Today, it's not as mysterious, but it's still active and still heavily restricted. Russia has more closed cities. Seversk used to be called Tomsk 7, and that alone tells you how secretive it It was, because numbers instead of names usually meant the place didn't officially exist. It was built around the Siberian Chemical Combine, a major nuclear facility. For decades, the entire city was fenced off with guarded checkpoints, and anyone living there had to be officially approved. Even today, Seversk is still a closed city. You can't casually visit, you can't drive in to look around, don't get on the road to it even without running into military security. But why would you really want to? Supposedly the people in town live normal lives, but I wouldn't want to be anywhere near a place like this. I'd be worried I was in the next Chernobyl. And in 1993, there was an accident. A tank exploded during plutonium processing and sent radioactive material across several towns. Australia has a ton of empty land, but the Woomera Prohibited area is on another level. It's a gigantic military testing zone in South Australia, one of the largest in the world. And it's been running since the 40s. The government mainly uses it for rocket launches, weapons testing, and drones. Basically anything they don't want civilians anywhere near. Depending on the schedule, huge portions of the zone get completely shut down. You don't have to guess what happens if something goes wrong during the types of tests they do. It's the kind of stuff that needs miles of empty desert just in case. The area also has past contamination sites from older testing programs. What makes Woomera interesting is how invisible it is. Unless you're Australian or into defense topics, most people don't even know this giant restricted zone exists, and yet it's big enough that if it were placed in Europe, it would stretch across multiple countries. Snake Island in Brazil is one of those places where the danger is completely out in the open, literally crawling all over the ground. The island is home to the golden lancehead, a critically endangered viper, and only live on this one island. And that's a really good thing, because these snakes are insanely venomous. If you aren't treated almost immediately, it's just game over. Scientists estimate that some parts of the island once had around 1 to 5 snakes per square meter. Even if numbers have dropped, it's still not a place you want to be. Because the species is only found here, Brazil completely bans the public. Not only is the island just incredibly lethal, they also want to protect the species. The Navy controls who gets near the island, and the only people allowed on shore are biologists who go through a bunch of safety steps before landing, and even they don't stay long. Surtsey is one of the most protected spots on the planet, and the reason has nothing to do with military secrets. This island in Iceland literally didn't exist until the 60s, and by that I mean the 1960s. It formed from a volcanic eruption between 1963 and 1967, and since then Iceland has treated it like a giant natural lab. They want to see how life develops on land this new, without human interference. That means the island is completely off limits to the public. Only a handful of scientists are allowed to land, and they make sure to follow very strict rules to make sure they don't accidentally introduce anything new. They've had instances where seeds from someone's shoe created unwanted plants, and those had to be removed. Even leaving behind food scraps is banned, because that can change the ecosystem in a way that ruins decades of research. Birds eventually started nesting here, bringing in seeds, and that's fine, that's natural. Plants then started to grow, insects found their way over. Everything happens slowly, naturally, with no human help. It's such a rare chance to see nature build itself basically from scratch. Lascaux Cave in France looks like something you'd want to visit at least once in your life. It has some of the most famous prehistoric paintings in the world, but unfortunately, the original cave has been completely closed since 1963. Once they opened it to visitors in the 40s and 50s, the humidity and carbon dioxide from human breath started messing with the art. Mold grew, minerals changed color, and the paintings started to degrade way faster than anyone expected. If people kept coming in, the cave art was gonna disappear, so the original site was shut down. Only researchers are allowed inside now and again. They go in for short periods, they monitor air quality constantly, and sometimes have to treat parts of the cave to stop fungal outbreaks. Visitors only see replicas, Lascaux 2, 3, and 4, which were built so the public could still experience the artwork without damaging the real thing. The Red Forest sits inside the Chernobyl exclusion zone. This is easily one of the most contaminated places on Earth. When the nuclear reactor exploded in 1986, the blast shot radioactive material across this forest. The pine trees absorbed so much radiation, they changed color, turning a reddish brown. Even after decades of cleanup, radiation levels are still very high. You can't wander into Red Forest the same way tourists visit other parts of the exclusion zone. Guides have very specific routes, they avoid certain patches completely, and some areas are just totally off limits even for trained workers. The ground itself is dangerous. Kicking up soil can release radioactive dust into the air. That's why cleanup teams rarely touch anything unless they absolutely have to. Another danger here is fire. Burning contaminated plants? Not good. All those radioactive particles are sent back into the air and the smoke will just carry it over other areas. It's pretty scary. All that said, I've been your host James and I'll catch you, yes you specifically, in the next video.